Hey, I'm YogiDonaldo, your octogenarian yogi.
In these videos, I'll share what I've learned over the years about yoga's ethics, its philosophy, its poses, its breath work, and meditation.
YogiDonaldo's YouTube channel is presented by Don English. Please pause and copy the lesson plan at the end of the video. May we be protected together, may we be nourished together, may we create strength together, may our work together bring spiritual awakening, and may there be no disharmony among us. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. In a previous musing on the truth about everything, we talked about how everything is connected to everything else, and how we don't just live in a three-dimensional world, but rather in a four-dimensional one where time is an often forgotten aspect of our lives. It's one of those things that our brains don't intuitively understand. We also talked about how our brains need to divide our world into separate units to create subjects and objects, to see things with beginnings, middles, and ends. We like things neat and tidy, when in fact things aren't neat and tidy. There aren't really subjects and objects, and events don't actually have a beginning or a middle or an end, because what was yesterday's end is today's continuation. But for us to be able to deal with and interact with our reality, we need to create subjects and objects, beginnings and endings. Our brains don't intuitively understand probabilities either. They're good at generalizing from one or two experiences and coming up with a conclusion that may or may not ever happen in some imagined future. These are things we have to puzzle out on our own, or have them explained to us. In her book, The Biggest Bluff, about chance and our attempts to control it, Maria Konnikova talks about probabilities and our brains. She says, a basic shortcoming of our neural wiring is that we can't quite grasp probabilities. Statistics are completely counterintuitive. Our brains are simply not cut out evolutionarily to understand that inherent uncertainty. There were no numbers or calculations in our early environment, just personal experience and antidote. We didn't learn to deal with information presented in an abstract fashion, such as tigers are incredibly rare in this part of the country, and you have just about a 2% chance of encountering one, and even lower chance of being attacked. We learned instead to deal with brute emotions, such as last night there was a tiger here and it looked pretty damn scary. Now for our ancestors, avoiding tigers that might stalk them as objects for their dinner made good evolutionary sense. This wasn't a time for our ancestors to be one with nature, to say to hell with probabilities and put themselves in harm's way. It was more useful to survival to avoid the tigers as much as possible, because they recognized it was better to err on the side of caution and not risk being dinner. The imperative for survival was to find ways to minimize dangers to existence, to find ways to create a more secure future for their own special sense of I-ness and for their descendants. And that would be us. And out of this mix, out of this Pandora's box, as it were, flew comparisons, competitiveness, judgments, desires, and aversions. And while there may have been a recognition of the importance of the group for survival, the sense of I-ness brought about a growing sense of separateness. Overall, it's been a good survival strategy. 7.9 billion people worldwide certainly attests to that. Our instinct for survival as a species created a sense of I-ness, and this sense of I-ness cut the world up into subjects and objects. The price of survival was a sense of me and them, which pushes us toward a sense of me versus them. We compare ourselves to others, we contrast ourselves with others, we judge others, we come to feel superior to others, and based on our prejudices, we come to discriminate against others in the hope of furthering our own survival. Our sense of I-ness indulges itself in what seems to bring pleasure, but it's mostly short-term pleasure, not long-term happiness. And oftentimes in the back of our minds, we know what we should be doing for our long-term happiness, but we manage to avoid doing those things. We're good at short-term gain and really bad at long-term strategies. Yoga starts from the premise that everything is connected to everything else through time, but that we've forgotten this truth and its implications. Or put another way, we are ignorant of it in the sense that we ignore this truth. The result of this ignorance is that we don't see the big picture. We see only a tiny disconnected portion. And this reminds me of something from one of those Saturday morning NPR shows years ago that played around with the idea of the Reader's Digest version of art. If you had a subscription, you would get 1 square inch of art monthly. Maybe this month your square inch would be the left corner of the Mona Lisa's smile, and next month your square inch might be a random square inch from a Monet painting. Similarly, we see a small portion of our reality and ignore the bigger picture. We mistake the transient for the eternal, the impure for the pure. We continue to indulge ourselves in things that bring us unhappiness, thinking that the next time maybe they'll bring us happiness. And finally, we forget our true nature, that we are not the wave, but rather the ocean. Earlier in this series on stress, the bull in our mental china shops, we said that yoga is trying to teach us how to quiet our monkey minds, and that this monkey mind is really all of the stress in our lives that we have to deal with. What our spiritual ignorance does is create our sense of I-ness, which in turn generates much of this stress. We tend to indulge our attachment to short-term happiness, avoiding doing the things we know would be good for us. And we become fearful and resistant to change as we embrace an ephemeral status quo and try to convince ourselves that it is the forever. Now, anything that we can do to lessen the sense of separation between ourselves and others moves us in the right direction. Just being aware of the separation is a good place to begin. There are several things that we can do to reduce the impact of these illusions we live with. Remembering that our thoughts and words in fact lead to actions is a good place to start. Maybe even just beginning to examine how our thoughts influence what we say and how we act can be a place to begin. Or we can work on our judgments, our comparisons, our unhelpful desires and aversions, and our fears. And here it may be useful to begin by examining how we, in fact, judge our own selves. Personally, I find working with my negative bias is a good place for me to begin because it seems to help me to get to the bottom of so many problems. Encouraging positivity can begin to reorient us too. At the end of my yoga classes and at the end of all of these videos, I recite a simple series of affirmations that, if we begin to work to integrate into our lives, will become life-changing. They are what are sometimes called the Four Immeasurables. May I be friendly toward the joyful, compassionate toward the suffering. May I celebrate the good in others and remain impartial to their faults and imperfections. A powerful life changer for me also was establishing a loving kindness practice. By saying daily, may I be filled with loving kindness, may I be peaceful and at ease, may I cause no pain or suffering to others, then next wishing the same to my loved ones, and then to all strangers, begins to break down all those barriers between myself and others. Another thing we can do is to understand how our actions, both positive and negative, have repercussions for others and for ourselves. Remembering that everything is connected to everything else, even in ways that we don't understand, is also useful. If we begin any of these practices, we can go a long way toward letting go of the negative aspects of our sense of I-ness, lessen the separation between ourselves and others, and in the process, maybe make this a slightly better world, or at least that portion that we can influence. Yoga offers several other ways to lessen our spiritual ignorance, but these can do for now. We'll get into yoga's ethics, meditation, and more breath practices at another time. May our bodies be strong, relaxed, and healthy. May our minds be calm, clear, and serene. May our hearts be filled with loving kindness, and may we live our lives in harmony with our true inner selves. May we be friendly toward the joyful, compassionate toward the suffering. May we celebrate the good in others and remain impartial to their faults and imperfections. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Pause, take a screenshot, and print for your later use.
I hope you'll subscribe and share these videos.